Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Tadaima Virtual Pilgrimage. We are focusing this week on resettlement, and I'm real excited to be here. My name is Michael Takada. I am the CEO of the Japanese American Service Committee. As I said, this week we're launching the resettlement segment. Today's program is entitled Chicago All Camps Reunion. But before we actually get into the reunion itself, we'd like to give you all a glimpse into the history of resettlement as it happened in the Chicago area. My father and uncle, my grandparents grew up in Los Angeles, and so they went through Santa Anita and ended up in Amachi. My mom's side experienced the war in Japan, living in Tokyo for the duration. So I'd like to just sort of pass the baton to my fellow speakers today, and they'll introduce themselves as well. So Lisa, I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, my name is Lisa Doi. I have lived my whole life around Chicago. My family before the war was in Stockton, California, and in the LA area. And then everyone was incarcerated at Rower, and from Rower resettled in Chicago. And I will pass it to Tonko, who is not related to me, but happy to have another Doi here.
Okay, my name, actually it's Toshko. I was given that name Toshko when I was born, but in camp, they gave me a nickname, Tonko. My last name is Doi. My husband is Paul Doi. I was born in Los Angeles, East LA, Boyle Heights, the day before Pearl Harbor. We went to Santa Anita, and from there, my entire family, my father's family, went to Roar, Arkansas. That's my history.
So do I just go? My name is Karen Izui Kanemoto. I was born and raised in Chicago post-war. And my folks came to Chicago separately from Minidoka. My dad's family was from Seattle, so he went to Bailey Gatzert and Broadway High School. My mom was a farmer living close to Portland, Oregon. They both went to Minidoka, and I don't think they knew each other there. I think they met and got married here in Chicago. I'm here by dint of the fact that I was the manager of the Legacy Center Archives and Library at the Japanese American Service Committee, and I'm currently with the Japanese Mutual Aid Society of Chicago, which was established pre-war by a bunch of Issei's. That's all I got to say.
Great, thank you, everybody. So what we'll do from here is we have some materials that we'd like to share with you all, and feel free to ask questions, make comments in the chat section, and we'll be monitoring, and we'll answer the questions once we get through the materials. So if we could start the slideshow, that would be great. So the Chicago Resettlers Committee is the organization that was established right after World War II. And I have the privilege and the honor of being the head of the organization. I've been with the organization now for a little over 6 years. And so much of the materials that you'll be seeing are coming out of the organization, archives and collections. So Brian Comey Dempster, who is a professor at the University of San Francisco, described resettlement as, if the drama of incarceration was an earthquake, concentrated and overt, marked by the bombing of Pearl Harbor and characterized by the camps strung with barbed wire and towers full of armed guards, then the drama of resettlement was the aftershock, drawn out of the insidious, signified by abandoned barracks and irretrievable homes, blisters and sore muscles from picking fruit and washing dishes, insults and stares from suspicious bosses. Sorry. So the executive order created the evacuation of Japanese people from the West Coast into the 10 different incarceration camps. And, you know, it was that history that set the stage for the Japanese American experience. So as I said, the Chicago Resettlers Committee was formed in 1946, and it was the result of efforts by local Japanese American residents with the assistance from the Welfare Council of Metropolitan Chicago. And other groups that helped included the American Friends Committee, the Chicago Church Federation, Hull House, the Immigrants Protective League, JCL, Olivet Institute, the Women's International League, and the YMCA and the YWCA of Chicago. So this picture shows that how large the group was, and this was in 1946. To give you a sense of magnitude, the 1940 census had just under 400 individuals identifying as Japanese in the Chicagoland area. The estimate in January of 1946, that number rose to 23,000. And so it was just an indicator of how the mass migration of those individuals who either couldn't or decided not to go back to their homes of origin on the West Coast, many passing through Chicago. The Resettler Committee was first located just outside of downtown Chicago on LaSalle Street. And the executive director at that time was Corey Kawasaki. And then he was followed by Jack Yasutaka in 1948. And during the early years, the service committee actually moved a little further north to 1100 North LaSalle Street. And then in 1951, they actually purchased the building. So the mission of the founders was to encourage and help resettlers become members of the Chicago community through social, economic, and cultural activities, to mobilize Americans of Japanese ancestry toward the strengthening of forces of democracy, and participating in efforts and plans to establish and maintain peace, to join forces with all Americans, regardless of race, creed, color, promote social and economic progress, and to eliminate discrimination, and to assist in the resettlement of people of Japanese ancestry. So here's just some examples of things that the Resettlers Committee did. They helped find new housing, help people find new jobs, as well as to help make new community, as indicated by the picture of the picnic, the summer picnic on the right.
Tonko, was there something you wanted to add? And I think you'll need to unmute your microphone.
As I was looking at that statement, it kind of looked like the same statement that was put out by the government telling Japanese Americans who were coming to leaving camp what they should be doing, how they should not congregate, with other Japanese, not to form social groups, etc. So that statement that you read from this Resettlers, was that reflective of the policy of the government?
Is that to me, Tonko?
It's in general. Whoever was reading that, but
yeah, I think it really was, sort of an aspirational, but also reflective of trying to fit in with the rest of society at that time. You know what? I think we won't be able to have commentary because these slides are going to just automatically flip every 40 seconds.
I understand. So, I'll be quiet.
So what ended up happening in the late 70s, as the Issei population continued to get older, the community recognized that they needed to do a little bit more. And so at that time, the Heiwa Terrace, which is a 200-unit residential apartment building, was built and opened up in 1980. And it currently is operating to this day under the JASC Housing Corporation. The community also went and built a extended care center, which they eventually ended up needing to sell because it just took a lot more effort than we were able to actually assume. So these now are just pictures, images showing what the service committee is doing now with the community and how it's sort of transformed into elder services, cultural programs, and then youth programming. Tampopokai, Dongurikai, our preschool program, and then our Japanese language conversation program for young people. These are current activities that are available. In addition, the service committee established in the 80s the Legacy Center and Archives and Library with the intent to preserve, exhibit materials that really promote the unique story of the Japanese American story in Chicago primarily, but also, as Issei came to America, we have probably over several hundred separate individual collections of materials, photographs, etc. And so you'll be able to look at a lot of this material on our website. And then here's sort of our teaser into our all camps reunion concept, which in this next segment that is going to be coming up, we will have additional pictures, illustrations, and whatnot that we all can kind of talk to you about.
Thanks so much, Mike. So I think, as Mike alluded to, next we're going to see some video footage from our All Camps reunion, as well as some historic archival video footage.
So much of this footage that you're seeing right now has been digitized recently, and so that is something that not only our organization but many other organizations are working very hard to take these family photos, these family movies, digitize them to preserve them, and then work with other partners to create some exhibits.
So I would be interested, as we're hearing about resettlement and sort of hearing from our panel about, to the extent you know, why did you and or your families choose to resettle in Chicago? Were there particular things about Chicago that drew people to choosing to live there?
So my dad was a senior in high school in '42, and he ended up trying to spend as much time out of the camp as possible. And he went on work details initially as a farmer in the Great Plains, but then found himself as far east as Cleveland and Chicago. Chicago ended up being the place where the most jobs were available. Not desirable, but at least it was employment.
Right, and I think that the traditional explanation is that Chicago had a lot of jobs available, a lot of educational opportunities available. I think that my mom came to, she graduated from Hunt High School in Minidoka in '43, and the next year she and a few friends came to Chicago without her family. Her intent was to be able to study and to be liberated from the farm. But, you know, my sneaking suspicion was that people came to Chicago because the railroads came here. You know, it's a big city. It's close to at least to Roar. And all the trains came through here. And I think that, you know, all of these adventuresome Niseis just kind of jumped off the train and gave it a shot.
As for my family, as I said, my father's entire family were interned in Arkansas. And we lived in Ohio for a few years. And there was a very small community of JAs there. And their social life all centered around the JACL. And when we would come to Chicago to visit my father's sister, my aunt, and we would drive down the street, maybe to Clark and Division area or wherever, my mother and father, if they saw an Asian person and how they recognized that they were Japanese, they would say, "Oh, Nihonjin no hito, Nihonjin no hito." Like they were so excited to see Japanese American people. So eventually what happened was our family moved to Chicago in the 50s, you know, for better economic resources. My family was helped by the Sun Cleaner family, which is the Hidaka family, and they helped many people open cleaners, which was a wonderful business for a family because the husband would do the cleaning and pressing, and the wife would do the sewing if she was able. So that's the reason why we came to Chicago.
Thank you. So we're going to see a bit of video that has some audio. So I'll ask the panel to mute themselves, and then we'll come back afterwards to talk a little bit more. So I know we were starting to get some questions. If other people want to share some questions, please put your questions in the chat and we'll get back to them after we watch some archival footage. We're going to be watching some footage of Issei, recorded in the 1970s, sharing their experiences in resettling to Chicago. So, you know, this is recently digitized footage and just a really great example of the resources of the JASC. So we'll talk to you on the other side.
When you think of Issei, what do you think?
Well, I think of the first generation Japanese that immigrated here to this country, including people like my parents.
Pioneers.
I think about my parents and my mother-in-law, I guess, and that their life is coming to an end.
Mostly, they're just think of them as old Japanese, and like mostly I just think of my grandmother when you talk about Issei, because that's the only Issei I really come in contact with. Good to kids people, hardworking people. In my younger days, tended to think that we're a lot different from us. Therefore, there was quite a lack of communication between Issei and myself. But lately, I've begun to appreciate them more, and I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance to communicate with them more deeply.
People who have gone through so much that I want to care for them. I see an Issei on the street and I feel like embracing them, and I feel like I always say hello, and I feel very close to them.
I see a lot of people that are really humble and reserved, and that they really kind of get pushed around, and now that like my generation was starting to come out of it, but I see a great bunch of people.
I don't want them to be in homes. I want to care for them at home.
They were put in the relocation camps during the war, and somehow they came out of that with no bitter feelings. And I feel no matter what old Japanese person I see, I can go up to them and talk with them, and they'll appreciate it. Or if they need a ride, I'd do anything for them when I see them. I feel some kind of connection with them.
I sort of feel like I'm like toward my grandmother, compassion or love,
Oh, these are people who care about me,
Right.
who work hard for me, who will do everything in their part to give me a better life.
Well, I don't feel so sorry about them because they already served their life, and they did a good job, I think, for being unable to speak English.
It's hard to communicate with them.
How about you?
Oh, well, I guess, these days I don't know, I don't really understand their culture as much.
Not to ignore them, because that's a trend with older people. You feel that you don't have anything to say, or a lot of times you feel that they really don't understand, but they do understand. They do have feelings, and I want to make them, feel as comfortable as possible and happy, I guess.
Well, I just think the main thing is, like if they want to help you, you just, respond in a receptive manner, and if they say, "Are you hungry?" I always say, "Okay, I'm hungry." So then they'll cook for you or something, and it makes them feel good, and even though you're not hungry, you're making them feel good. And you just do what if they want to help you, just let them help you. That's the thing. I think that's the main thing, because they're not going to be around that much longer, so just make it easier for them. All right, take the pressure of finances off of their backs.
I try to speak Japanese more.
Try to learn Japanese.
Well, I would think now, in terms here, especially in Chicago, and in other centers where there's fairly large groups of Japanese, I think we have to think in terms of housing for them. This is a big problem in that they have no place to go after they say that they're alone. For example, there are many who say they're alone. Well, they have no place to go, and language is a problem for them too.
Right.
And I think housing, particularly, is one thing. Also, these people are used to working all the time. They have to have some way to find something to fulfill this work that they've been so long doing. And if they can find recreation, fine. But I think this has to be organized for them.
Maybe open a social spot so they could hang around, hang out, and play Japanese games or golf.
I think now we're living in a very modern, fast world. Now I think we should have Japanese TV.
Kind of just help them out around the garden, because that's what I think they like a lot. Is, planting things and watching things grow.
Well, I really think that the Isseis have a little different attitude than the Niseis. I think they really know how to enjoy themselves, and not worry too much about society. I notice when they have parties and things, they really let themselves go, and they sing even if they're out of tune. And I really envy them for being able to do this.
What do you feel when you think about dying?
You mean for the East States or for me?
Either.
oh, I don't feel nothing. Dying is the thing that comes natural, and it does not hurt unless you're dying of sickness. Then you might have pain, but if you're gonna die natural, your spirit just goes out, and you don't feel. There's no pain. Nothing, nothing to worry about.
I don't really know. I don't know, sort of like a scary feeling. I think it's just a natural part of life, and I think I think that there's nothing to fear about it. I think the Issei's feel that way also.
I don't know if that's an attitude of the Issei's. I think they accept life as it is. When you become old and then your time is here, and I think they accept it graciously. I don't know if I can. Maybe as I get old, maybe I can. I don't want to now. I just think I don't want to think of it because I enjoy life so much. I just can't think of partying.
They struggled hard, our parents struggled hard, and now we have it easy. And I think when I die, I won't feel like I've missed anything.
Well, I don't think about it really. You know, I just more or less live day to day. I mean, I think the worst part of dying is the situation you leave people who, your loved ones who you leave behind. I worry more about that than about dying itself.
Unfortunately, for a lot of the Issei, some of them died, I'm afraid, too young not to partake of the good things that came a little later after that struggle that took place in the early years of their history.
Well, then you take care of him. Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah, that's all right. At the Teiju Shakai Japanese American Service Committee, the social service workers generally start the day by making contact with clients. もしもし、野尻さんですか？私、定住社会のフリッキーです。いかがですか? Taking the time to be pleasant, to ask about their health, talking about the weather or about the family is important, even in these short contacts. Issei appreciate people who know and observe Japanese customs. Some clients are hard of hearing. Others don't have telephone or are afraid to pick up phone because they can't understand English. Clients like these need a letter so that they don't forget we are coming. On the job, we don't think it's a waste of time to chit-chat. We feel the human touch is important, especially with old people. We have to work with them for a long period of time, so keeping relationships warm and pleasant helps.
Before I forget, I wanted to discuss with you about our social program. Okay. I'm really in a quandary about July social program, where to go and what to do. In our planning committee, we had planetarium down, but we've been there recently.
Before we start our individual rounds, we generally need to talk about our clients and the program. We talk about how we can help this client. What is the best way to handle the situation? What is the plan for this program? And so on.
For a picnic. So that's all set now. One of the clients brought this in. Toilet paper cover.
Each client we serve has different needs, and we try to tailor our program to them.
Our latest client, I was kind of surprised to see how well she looked, considering she was a stroke patient. Maybe she'd like to do a little homework. I'd be willing to bring it for her. And she said she'll think about it and let me know.
Let her do whatever she can do, not do everything for her. Let her do. Yeah.
Hello, 藤沢さん、いらっしゃいます。佐藤です。
Others need the services of a homemaker. Mrs. Fujisawa is hard of hearing, so she leaves the door open for a worker.
いかがですか？どうでした？お元気？ありがとう。これね、頼まれた本。これね、買い物してきましたよ。これが本で。はい、じゃあね。なくしてお金払う。はい、いいですね。ありがとうございます。お金確かにいただきましたね。これね、袋を頼まれたでしょ。このぐらい大きいのができましたよ。ほら、このぐらい。いいですか？
Mrs. Fujisawa is moving, and she wanted a big laundry bag to put her clothes in. Also, the homemaker cleans or cooks whatever chores need doing. In all our contacts, companionship is important. Some clients have definite problems and need individual attention. But for many Issei's, just coming to the work center and working and feeling needed is a great help.
These are dental and first aid room or examination room. Monthly, a volunteer registered nurse takes a blood pressure of Issei's and maintains a record on them. A volunteer dentist makes biweekly visits and checks teeth, usually dentures. The charge is only for materials. The medical facility is not used enough due to the lack of volunteer doctors. Some of our senior citizens or Issei's help instruct in other classes, such as Mr. Higashigawa here, who is a instructor in cooking for our Issei students here, and he is one of the well-known chefs. When there is a large participation of Issei in an outside activity, we often close the workshop for the day. That's because we stress coming to the center to enjoy life by working and sharing, going to classes in ceramics, sewing, macrame, weaving, brush painting, singing, and body dynamics.
Classes and social hours help relieve the isolation and provide human interaction that Issei need.
I inherited Mr. Moriyama from my predecessor. At first, I found his speech quite incoherent and his ideas unclear. He often mentions the FBI. I discovered that the whole thing with the FBI had to do with an encounter he had with them during wartime. This led to his now imagining things. That's why I decided that I must listen to him seriously, but at the same time, not take the stories too seriously. So I began by making up incredible stories about the FBI. They were so ridiculous that he would laugh at them and say that I was crazy. It is hard for me sometimes to tell what is real and what is not. I kid around with him because I think it kind of jolts him back to reality. I wave my hands in front of him, poke him, and often startle him. I realize that this method will not work with just anybody, but it works with Mr. Moriyama. When we kid each other, we're just like buddies. I guess we understand each other.
Having a lot of other activities. You know, we increased more activities at our center.
Oh, yeah. Mrs. Ijichi was once very withdrawn, and a problem that a helper will have to face is how to pull people out of this withdrawal and still be honest about their situation.
They're really enjoying those programs.
Oh, that's nice.
I hope you can come, though.
Oh, yes.
For our program.
Oh, well, thank you. I would like to join.
if you like to come, we can pick you up and come, let you come someday to see.
Uh-huh.
That must be nice, isn't it?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Do you think you can come sometime? If I can come and pick you up?
Well, we have that here too,
Oh, that's right. That's right too. But I think everybody, your friends are waiting to see you too.
Well, is Miss Lewis still working?
Mrs. Lewis is not too well, so she's staying home.
Oh, she's not working now.
Not working now.
Oh.
But Mrs. Campbell is 90 years old. She's working every day.
Oh, it's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, we had a special birthday for her.
There are sad parts to the job. Withdrawal and death are some of these. But the main job of the social service worker is to help create an atmosphere in which the Issei can still feel useful, helping things to grow, sharing work and pleasure, continuing to do the everyday things that bring fun and meaning into their lives.
We're so lucky that we have this recently digitized material at the JASC. I feel like both in terms of talking about incarceration as well as resettlement, it's often told through a Nisei and Sansei lens. So it's just nice to be able to include Issei voices and perspectives there. So we'll continue talking to each other. You're now going to see some footage as well as some photographs while we're talking. Eventually, yes, now you're going to see some going back in time a little bit to 1952 with some home footage of the Japanese American memorial service at Montrose Cemetery. And so I wonder, Karen, maybe you could talk a little bit about how both the burial site at Montrose Cemetery came about in Chicago, as well as the Nisei Post and mutual aid and the role there.
Right. Well, I have to say, first of all, I had no idea that this film existed until a couple of days ago, and it is just so thrilling to see this. The Japanese Mutual Aid Society sponsored Memorial Day services since the beginning, since it was organized in the 30s, and that mausoleum that you saw was debuted at the 1938 Memorial Day. At that time, it was about the size of a closet. You can see in 58, they added a couple of wings on the side. Now, the way mutual aid came about was that a lot of the early Isseis in Chicago died here without any funds, any family to take care of them. A bunch of more established Issei decided that they needed to take care of them, to give them a burial if need be, or if need be, to send their remains back to Japan. The Japanese Mutual Aid Society is kind of a bootstraps organization in that way. They were also strangely concerned that people were being buried here, there, and everywhere, and there was no way to keep track of them. So they were able to form a collaboration with Montrose Cemetery in the city, which continues until this day, through this day, and they bought up, piece by piece graves that they could bury the Japanese dead in. And honestly, I do believe that Montrose Cemetery may be the only place in Chicago that out-of-towners can visit and kind of see Japanese American history, Japanese Chicago history kind of laid out before them. But about this particular service, it's very interesting to me that it seems to be mainly a Buddhist service, although there was that one lady who came up and offered incense and did the claps. These guys, I do not think they're the Chicago Nisei Post 1183 American Legion. I think the American Legion guys are wearing the fabric garrison caps instead.
Could you maybe talk about the Nisei Post? Do you know when it was founded and how it came about?
I think it was founded in '49, if I'm not mistaken. They originally were called the Rome Arno Post, kind of reflecting the fact that these were campaigns that the 442 fought in. And the Nisei Post still exists today. I think that their membership is dwindling. And in fact, just within the past few weeks, we've lost maybe 2 or 3 Post members. But while they were going strong, they, for example, sponsored a cleanup at the War Cemetery. They sponsored the Nisei Ambassadors Drum and Bugle Corps in the, I don't know, in the 60s, definitely. I don't know whether it went through the 70s or 80s. And, you know, they did good works, like delivering meals to Issei, and now I think they do sponsor bingo sessions at local VA hospitals. Now, this is interesting. I don't know whether this is a deliberate juxtaposition or if it just happened to be this way, to have Memorial Day and Obon in one piece of film. Because I always think of Memorial Day as being kind of a springtime Obon. And then Obon I think of as being a summertime Day of the Dead. But this is Midwest Buddhist Church in its old location on Menominee. Well, it's still on Menominee. But it's interesting to see how many non-Japanese there are dancing. And I kind of think that Midwest Buddhist Temple, as it's known now, is located in Old Town, which used to be kind of an artsy-blartsy area. Now it's kind of a high income, high property values section of the city. You can tell that they're doing the Bon Odori dance, which is traditionally either the first, well, it could be the first or last, or both, dance at Obon Odori.
Yeah, so far we've heard about a range of different organizations that were around to help people resettle in Chicago. I mean, you know, I think one of the really compelling things about the videos about the service committee is just all of the services that were offered. And then Karen, you started to talk a little bit about mutual aid and the way that mutual aid supported resettlers, churches and temples, the Nisei Post to support veterans. What other kinds of either Japanese American run or City of Chicago run or just other nonprofit run organizations or institutions have you all heard about or did your families use when you were coming to Chicago to help transition into a new city?
You know, I was hoping that somebody like Tonko would talk about the girls and girls clubs and boys teams. And that was, I think, kind of a subset of the Chicago Resettlers Committee, or also known as the JASC. The teams may or may not have all been under the Chicago Nisei Athletic Association. But we saw some stills in the earlier slideshow from CNAA teams, beauty queens, things like that associated with Chicago Nisei Athletic Association activities.
Yeah, Tonko, could you talk about the girls' clubs?
I can. And there weren't just girls' clubs, but there, to use the word boys' clubs. Clubs were formed, I guess, in the late 40s and 50s of boys and girls of the same age, the same neighborhood. For instance, my sister-in-law belonged to a club, and I guess this would have been like the Jolenes. They were, she would be like 90 at this time, but when she was like in her late teens, she formed friendships with women or girls of the same age, the same high school, and those friendships continue to this day. And sometimes they use their maiden names when they talk about that. We're going to a different. Do you want to talk about this then?
Sure. Yeah. So for the rest of our time, we're going to see some picture slideshows that kind of get to other aspects of community experience in Chicago. Does someone want to talk about the Nikkei picnic and how it came about?
I personally am not a picnic person.
Okay. I can speak to it more recently. I mean, I know that back in the 50s and 60s, the community did make a strong attempt and executed having annual summer picnics. They ended up coming up more recently, and we've now included the Japanese national community as well. I'm going to let Tonko talk here because this is really at the heart of what we're doing with regard to all camp.
The beginning, in the first shot, I guess that was last year, 2019, right here. And these were people who were in camp, and they came to participate in the All Camps reunion. I'm not going to tell you the number because there's a difference in the number. But in the beginning, it used to be much more elaborate with catered lunches, etc. But we always have a program. And the people who came from all the camps, all 10 camps. And this year, more and more young people are bringing their parents and grandparents and to learn. So every year we have a theme. This year, and if in this picture, that's my sister-in-law, Grace Keto. And she's telling the story of her mother's death. And I've heard this story many times, but I've never seen my sister-in-law show that much emotion, any emotion about it. Her mother was pregnant with her 5th child, was in Santa Anita, and died giving birth to the child. And that day, we brought people up to the front and interviewed them about their experiences. And there was a lot of stories with heartfelt emotion.
Yeah, so thank you. Now you're seeing pictures of what Memorial Day looks like today. So in there, you can see the mausoleum, as Karen mentioned, has been expanded from the historic footage you saw. But this gives you a little sense of then and now. Karen, do you want to talk a little bit about, something I've heard from people's experiences was trouble finding places to bury family members immediately after camp. Could you maybe talk a little bit about what spurred like the formation of this plot at Montrose?
Well, this is particularly, you're quite right, particularly after World War II, there was a real difficulty finding cemeteries that will take the Japanese dead or Japanese American dead, including veterans. The in fact, there was a study of, oh God, it must have been 16, 20 local cemeteries, aside from Montrose, that did not, definitely flatly said, no, we will not take the Japanese American dead. Now, fortunately, mutual aid had been acquiring graves at Montrose all along. So, you know, when all else failed, I guess people were able to come to Montrose Cemetery. There is a certain amount of there are a certain amount of graves, old graves at Graceland Cemetery, which is near the current location of the Japanese American Service Committee, and certain amount of older graves at Oakwoods on the south side. But you know, it's just very, very strange that you know, people's prejudices kind of extend to the dead. But that's people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So now we're seeing footage of the contemporary JASC. Mike, do you maybe want to talk a little bit? I found it really interesting to hear about the historic programs that the JASC ran in 1975 when we were watching that video. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about what you all do today?
Yeah, so over time, the organization has transitioned to, you know, at its core, make itself available to anybody who has an interest in the Japanese culture and the Japanese American heritage. And, you know, whether that is taking part in elder services, adult day services, home support service programs, counseling, to, you know, the things that you're seeing here, cultural programs where young families are trying to, you know, impart the Japanese culture, the Japanese experience to their families. And oftentimes these families are bicultural families. And so there is, you know, still a need for people to want to be able to provide their heritage and their legacy to their little ones. And so, you know, a lot of the things that you saw just in this most recent clip, really in a lot of ways, I believe, mirror what my dad's generation, the Nisei, were doing for us as Sansei. You know, having Bonodori, doing Mochitsuki, and what have you. And I'm thrilled that there are organizations and groups and collaborative efforts to you know, sort of maintain that tradition. It doesn't necessarily look exactly like it did in the 50s and the 60s, but you know, we're still as a community doing it. And I think that's what's really interesting about Chicago. And the other thing that I'll say about Chicago, and I've mentioned this to people on the West Coast that I come across, and some of, like, I was at Jerome Rohrer's pilgrimage 2 years ago. Chicago is like an oasis. You know, when something JA is happening, people just come out to it because we are an oasis sort of in a desert, right? Whereas I talk to colleagues on the West Coast and they say, well, you know, we threw up an event, you know, the other night, and we were having a little challenge drawing people. But and they recognized that a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were many other opportunities for similar sorts of gatherings. And so it just kind of gets lost in that high concentration, whereas again, in Chicago, we're a much smaller community. We're spread out in all throughout Chicagoland. So when we do something like this holiday program called Holiday Delight, as you can see, you know, the community comes out in droves, and then, you know, gets a nice meal, catches up with old friends. There's things for the kids to do. There's a Japanese American Santa Claus. We have our cultural arts like taiko drumming, and it's really just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, thank you. So we're about to close out our accompanying videos and pictures. So I'm going to put a plug in for those watching us. If you would like to put a question in the comment bar, we'd be happy to answer it. But I'll maybe kick us off with a question about to all three of you about your own experiences growing up in Chicago. You know, as Mike was just talking about, you're seeing what kinds of activities are available for kids nowadays, but what kinds of activities did you all participate in that made you feel connected to a Japanese American community in Chicago when you were growing up?
Well, interesting question. Until I was 10, my family lived in Englewood, which was at that time, at the beginning, was kind of a transitional neighborhood, and by the time we left, it was pretty much all Black. So I didn't have any real connection with the community. My grandpa used to take me to Japanese language classes at Buddhist Temple of Chicago. And of course, we were always members, or at least since '55, we were members of the Buddhist Temple of Chicago, which at that time was the Chicago Buddhist Church. So that got us as far as Hyde Park. But it wasn't until I was like way older that I felt any sort of connection with the community. And just to kind of digress here, I want to say that in the slideshow, there was the little segment about Tampopokai. And I just wanted to add that one of the foremost social workers at JASC said that the hidden agenda of Tampopokai is to be a support group for Japanese moms. Second thing I wanted to say is that my daughter is a millennial. She's 26 now. And the Tampopokai leader, Naomi Negi, was a genius then, and she's still a genius now. So there we go. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Tonko, yeah, what about you? What did you do as a kid?
Well, I came to Chicago late. I was 16. We came in 1957. And as I said, my parents came here for better economic opportunities. But a few things I want to mention about like the social service committees. Whenever I visit a city that has a large Japanese American community, I go to their social center. And I visited one in Gardena and one in San Francisco and in Chinatown, Chicago. And all of them said that Chicago Resettlers, or JASC, was their go-to model for forming and establishing. And you would think that would be unusual, you know, like in California, especially with such a large JA population. But they all came to Chicago to look at and mirror that. Secondly, the Kenjinkai I wanted to mention. When we came into the 50s, the Kenjinkai, or province organizations like Hiroshima Kenjinkai, Wakayama Kenjinkai, people that came to the United States or whose families came to the United States from different kens would have picnics, parties, events. That was very strong, especially Hiroshima Kenjinkai. I remember going to one and it was just huge, you know. Another thing we talked about, Karen said, the Chicago All Clubs reunion. We used to hold them in Las Vegas, and we would draw people like 200 plus that came from around the country. But a lot of them relocated to California, but in Las Vegas, and they would come and they would sit with their old friends from, you know, high school years, and there could have been a millionaire at the table, there could have been a guy on welfare, but nobody talked about their economic status or they all talked about the old days when they would stand on the corner and this one would do something stupid, and they drive around in a car and no gas when it was 25 cents a gallon. I mean, it was just the old days and reminiscing and having so much fun. I want to show you this t-shirt. I told my friend Victor I would have. It's the Chicago Vikings Reunion Vegas. And this was a club where the guys, this was a guys club, were my age. They were born in 1941. Sun Nkobose was one, Victor Nakawadase was another, Wayne Fujiwara. And those friendships from the time they were in grammar school, maybe 6 years old, 7, still go on today. So that's my story.
Yeah, Mike, what about you? Anything from your childhood that made you feel connected to the community?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my dad is Nisei from out of LA, and but my mom is born and raised in Japan, didn't come to the States till after the war. And to this day, fortunately, both of them are alive. My mom just turned 90, my dad's 95. My mom, I recall telling the story when I was younger in the 60s growing up, was a little bit put off because whenever she would find herself in the crowd of Japanese Americans, the first question asked is, "What camp are you from?" And initially my mom was just totally baffled. She had no knowledge really, or very minimal knowledge about that. And the way she would tell it was, once she said, "Oh no, I was born and raised in Japan," people would just sort of walk away. That's her story. But anyway, so when I was really young, we didn't really stay connected. We kind of sort of, as a family, sort of kind of stayed to ourselves, which is a little bit difficult for me, because I would go, where I did connect was through the Japanese language programs at the temple schools, whether initially it was Midwest Buddhist Temple, and then it was at Buddhist Temple of Chicago, BTC. And there, I would get glimpses into drum and bugle corps. I got glimpses into kendo and judo, but I didn't, as a little one or as a kid, feel completely supported by my folks to kind of like get involved. So I kind of only grew up with the language connection. But it was as I got older in college, became a lot more active in Asian American issues and my heritage. That's when I really reconnected with the Japanese American community.
Thanks. I'm going to put another plug in for our viewers. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We'd be happy to answer them. But as I've been looking at the comments that have been coming in, I think one of the things that's unique about the Chicago experience is that many people came to Chicago even for just a brief period of time. So Karen has been alluding a little bit to a pre-war Chicago community. There were, about 300 people, Japanese American people living in Chicago before the war. And that number actually jumped up to close to 20,000 people who were living in Chicago around 1945. So really one of the largest before the West Coast was reopened to allow Japanese Americans to return. Chicago was the largest resettlement site for Japanese Americans in the country. So for those watching, if you're interested, one of the, I think, good resources for finding out whether or not your family came to Chicago for a short period of time, you can look for the War Relocation Authority's final accountability rosters, which are all digitized by Densho now. And you can look and see, where did your family go immediately after they were incarcerated. And you'll find that many came to Chicago, even if it was just for 1 or 2 years before returning to homes on the West Coast. So one of our questions from the audience is about racism that Japanese Americans experienced in Chicago after the war. Does anyone want to talk about, stories or incidences of racial discrimination?
Well, I alluded to something with Dr. Ben Chikaraishi in another video. I don't know when that will be shown, but he talked about, Dr. Ben, when he came to Chicago from Aurora, Arkansas, talked about having a list of available apartments that he would go to one after the other, and either the people wouldn't open the door, or they say, no, we don't have an apartment for rent. And he said, but the sign says for rent. He said, oh, that must have been a mistake. We'll take it down. So there were a lot of discrimination in when people tried to find housing.
Yeah, can I add something? And this kind of supports what Tonko said. I talked to Fred Yamaguchi maybe a year or two before he died, and he said also he was here in an apartment with his wife. She was pregnant. He thought, well, I'd better get a bigger place. Also, he was concerned because his parents were coming to Chicago. And again, whenever he went to visit a place to rent, he would basically get the door slammed in his face. So he said, and he's 24 years old, he said, I better buy a building. So he did. It's, when you think about how young these people were, and how they kind of mustered up the will to do something to provide for their families. It's really incredible.
I think that in Chicago, there's a certain strength, even today. We see it in our grandparents, our parents, the will to succeed. A couple of things like with the mutual aid, and Karen didn't say this, but, up until like last year, the plots for were like $250 per plot, which I'm guessing it is like a rate that is unbelievable. I mean, if you were to look at funeral, and they were able to exist all these years just with that. But yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've heard is that people chose Chicago because they thought there might be less racism. There still isn't a very large Asian American community in Chicago as compared to other parts of the US. And so I think, amongst Nisei, the things I've heard is sort of they're entering a city that is unfamiliar with Asian Americans and sort of somewhat unsure what to do. But some of the legal barriers on the West Coast, like alien land laws, state by state laws across the West Coast, never existed in a state like Illinois. So there were some ways in which this more pervasive sense of anti-Asian sentiment was not as prevalent in Chicago, although there were certainly examples of discrimination that people experienced. And then the other thing that Karen mentioned in her own experience was Japanese Americans in Chicago often lived in neighborhoods between Black and white communities, sort of serving as a buffer between Black and white neighborhoods in Chicago. And so I think that was also sort of, you were sort of shunned by both sides, or there was this in-betweenness that was experienced by Japanese Americans in Chicago. Mike, I saw you unmuted. Were you going to add something?
Well, I was just going to speak to sort of the modern day, particularly with the COVID and, sort of the rising incidences of Asian American discrimination and racism. I don't know for a fact what the numbers are in terms of the Japanese American community, but I do know that even in Chicago, Asian Americans have been reporting incidences where they've experienced racist acts, comments as a result of COVID. And there are organizations locally and nationally, like Asian Americans Advancing Justice, who are making themselves available, pointing people to reporting mechanisms.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. I'm going to see, are there any last comments before we share a final little trailer film?
One thing that I wanted to mention was the Friends, or the Quakers. When we moved to Ohio, to Cincinnati, we moved to a hostel that was run by the Quakers, or the Friends. And I think that that religious group helped many people when they left camp or brought them out of camp to go to colleges, to schools, and for housing. And also talking about the Black and Japanese and white neighborhoods, I think that I always felt more accepted in the Black neighborhood where we lived in Ohio. It was kind of a mixed area, but the Black children in that school were more accepting, I believe.
I also wanted to say something. I just wanted to make a pitch for the JSC archives, the publicly accessible catalog, which was formed partly due to a JASC grant. You can access it via the JSC website. Information was on an earlier slide. Also, if you have a long lost family member who came to Chicago and disappeared, mutual aid may be able to help you with that, with our records. And you can contact us through our website, that's jmaschicago, one word, .org. We have a listing of people in our sections of the cemetery, in the mausoleum, etc. Third thing is, I'm waiting for somebody to write the definitive history of Japanese in Chicago. So somebody out there, do it.
What does that mean, definitive?
Definitive. Well, there's a couple of texts in Japanese that were written in the 80s, which, of course, I don't read Japanese, but whatever. But yes, I mean, references, stuff other than pictures.
A deep dive.
Like a real hardcore history. Lisa.
Well, thank you all again so much for taking time to be on this today. We're going to close by watching the trailer for a film called Resettled Roots, which is available all week as part of the Tadaima package of programs. So if you go to the Tadaima website, you'll be able to watch this full film, which talks about resettlement to Chicago. Thank you all again, and enjoy the trailer.
Topaz. Yay, Topaz! And Tule Lake. Wow! A lot of people from Tule Lake. Okay. Thank you very much.
I don't think anyone at first thought of that we would ever be gathered up and put into camps.
Military authority determined that citizens and aliens alike would have to move. Neither the Army nor the War Relocation Authority relished the idea of taking men, women, and children from their homes, their shops, and their farms. So the military and civilian agencies alike determined to do the job as a democracy should, with real consideration for the people involved.
It was a shock because when the buses went in through the gates, there were soldiers and barbed wire fences everywhere.
The moment you went into one of these stalls, there was just smell of horses and manure, and they had 4 cots lived side by side. And that was our home for May, April to August.
As time starts to pass, while the Japanese Americans are in the camps, increasingly it becomes more and more untenable for the U.S. government to justify incarcerating these people for longer and longer periods of time. And so what they end up doing is starting to distribute a questionnaire to everybody who is in the camps. Many people call this the loyalty oath questionnaire. If you had answered yes, yes, then you are eligible to begin to search for work and to apply for leave clearance.
A short time ago, they were in a relocation center. Now they're in the Middle West, renewing their touch with the world they left a year earlier. They're facing life in a new community with confidence, together.
Chicago was probably one of the big cities that was full of opportunities of almost every kind of job.
Back in 51 and 52, people could reject your application to rent based on race.
I remember going to the bathroom and you could hear the rats in the
It
wall.
was a roach-infested ghetto building.
Oh my gosh. It's just horrible.
A lot of times people, they look at the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II, and they think that the entire thing started with Pearl Harbor. The reality is that the Japanese were a precarious population from even before that period of time.
It's the experience of one group at one period of time, but there are things in there that are universal, and there are things that are important to capture because history repeats itself.